Welcome to a new series in our journey of adult education at Grace United Methodist Church in Winfield, Kansas. We began this journey of these lessons and these series 4 years ago in response to uh, one of the dilemmas that every local congregation faced in response to COVID, the pandemic which prevented face-to-face contact in the ministry of education. Now, we've done about 15 series, and in almost every series, the subject of the centrality of the attitude of forgiveness in the life and teachings of Jesus has come up as a part of the discussion in these series. We've touched on the subject, we've discussed it briefly, and then moved on. I think in a real sense, we've sort of left it hanging without intentional discussion and study. A good illustration was our last session on prayer last week, which we finished that series. As we reflected on the Lord's Prayer, we emphasized the inclusion in the prayer of the experience of forgiveness. That's just an illustration of how we've touched on this subject. Well, I've decided that we've let this subject of forgiveness hanging for long enough. We're going to spend the next few weeks digging deeper into the experience of forgiveness, which in my opinion is the heart of the good news. The heart of the gospel is the message of forgiveness. It is that which sets followers of Jesus apart in a distinctive understanding of faith, servanthood, and discipleship. What sets us apart is our understanding of the experience of forgiveness. Now, as we dig deeper into the experience of being forgiven by God, forgiving others who have wronged us, and being forgiven by those whom we have wronged, we will discover that forgiveness is a way of life which sort of replaces the natural tendencies that all of us have in the face of wrongdoing. These natural tendencies are apathy, I don't care; retaliation, I'm gonna get back; vindictiveness, you'll pay for this; revenge, I'll end up on top; and amnesia, just forgetting that it happened. Now, these tendencies are set aside and replaced by forgiveness in the life and teachings of Jesus. Now, I'm coming at this subject out of a ministry of 20 years as a pastor of a local church, 20 years as a pastor to pastor, as bishops in the church, and 20 years in my retirement of living with the laity of the church from the perspective of the pew. And during each segment of this journey I've had, I've just witnessed so many of us getting tripped up, annoyed, sometimes frustrated and discouraged around our personal dilemma and the dilemma of others dealing with the high calling to be forgiven and forgiving. Now, there's 4 events that I want to share with you briefly that have really influenced me in this journey, so you'll have a sense of where I'm coming from. The first is the history of the Commission on Truth and Reconciliation in South Africa, which raised forgiveness as the unfinished business after apartheid was legally ended. Nelson Mandela was elected president, a new constitution. My friend and colleague in faith, Bishop Tutu, engineered and led the work of this historic commission, which addressed the unfinished business of forgiveness as a secular civil issue in South Africa. That prompted a lot of thought, and it jarred some of my understandings around forgiveness. Tutu has written a book 10 years later after I was with him and got introduced to his thought. He's written a wonderful book, No Future Without Forgiveness. So the Commission on Truth and Reconciliation in South Africa, it surfaced forgiveness as an issue for a government to face. The second event was another event in Africa where I preached to 2,000 Liberians who were experiencing the rebel takeover of their land, a nation that had been formed and developed by returned slaves from the United States. At the end of my sermon, a layperson addressed those 2,000 worshipers with a witness that has formed my faith since that event. Now, the third event was when I was the bishop and a United Methodist pastor, preached a sermon to a lot of persons. It was a large congregation, and they preached this sermon on forgiveness, advocating that we do not need to forgive until a person asks for forgiveness. Then we are obligated in faith to respond. Well, to put it mildly, many laypersons in that congregation raised questions whether or not this interpretation was consistent with the life and teachings of Jesus. Luckily, instead of a knee-jerk reaction, I was able to facilitate a lot of dialogue, including my own thoughts, a time of study, reflection within our community of faith that moved all of us a bit in our understanding of forgiveness. The last event was when I invited Chaplain Post, who was the chaplain at the penitentiary where the two murderers of the Clutter family in Holcomb, Kansas, in cold blood, Truman Capote's title of the book that he wrote about this horrible experience. He spoke to 700 youth that Sunday afternoon, and he spoke to the youth concerning his forgiveness of these two murders. A life-changing day. Now, we're going to explore the issues around forgiveness by looking at the experience of forgiveness in all of our lives. We're going to look at the witness of Jesus concerning forgiveness and how each of us have struggled with putting aside these natural tendencies that each of us have in response to human wrongdoings. But in this first week, I want to conclude by inviting you to start where Bishop Tutu started with me 10 years before he wrote the book. And he ends in his writings and his teachings. Tutu asks the question, what is it that enables many persons to choose to forgive rather than demand revenge? Now, Tutu answers his own question, defining the word from his language, Ubuntu, U-B-U-N-T-U, Ubuntu, which is difficult to translate into the English language. There's no word in English that matches the meaning of Ubuntu. Ubuntu is when a person shares what they have. Ubuntu is when one's humanity is bound up in the relationship that that person has with others. Ubuntu is when one believes that they are a person through the personhood of others. All about relationships. One's humanity is bound up in the humanity of the other person. Therefore, forgiveness is the best form of self-interest for a person who has the attitude of Ubuntu. You see, all persons are bound up together in a bundle, if you will. And therefore, when one person is dehumanized, all are dehumanized. When one person is oppressed, all are oppressed. When one is diminished, all are diminished. You see, in summary, when one has the attitude of Ubuntu, forgiveness is a way of life. Ubuntu is what makes restoration, rehabilitation, and reconciliation a reality instead of an impossible, never to be seen dream. Let me repeat. This attitude of Ubuntu in the life of an individual is what makes restoration, rehabilitation, and reconciliation a reality instead of an impossible, never to be seen dream. That launching pad of describing Ubuntu, I'm sure will lead to a lot of thought and a lot of conversation. But maybe these questions will start us on our journey. First of all, what questions do you have concerning forgiveness being the heart of what Jesus taught and lived? Secondly, What's your response to the understanding that all human beings are in a bundle, and what happens to one happens to all? And finally, the provocative question for me is individualism the opposite of Ubuntu? Welcome to the journey. Thank you for joining us.